Hi guys, welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. I just want to pause for a second and say thank you. Whether you've been here from the start or just found your way in, your presence means more than I can say. This little corner of the internet has become something special, not because of the stories alone, but because of you, the way you listen, feel, and share. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and leave a comment. You make this space feel alive. Now let's get into it. Have you ever heard of a creature so feared, so misunderstood, yet it saved a pregnant woman's life and helped deliver her baby in the middle of a storm? This isn't a legend. It happened deep in the Ashwood Mountains of Oregon. Contrary to what most believe, Bigfoot isn't just a wild myth lurking in the woods. They have families. They hold rituals. They feel. And when Lyra Boone, an 8 months pregnant nurse, was injured and stranded alone in the forest, they came to her. They protected her, fed her, and stood silently around her as she gave birth beneath a canopy of firelight and rain. Based on eyewitness accounts and a child born with a mysterious birthmark, this story has left even skeptics speechless. In the next few minutes, you'll discover a gripping survival tale, an unspoken bond between two mothers, one human, one not, and the eerie truth that, 10 years later, the connection still lingers. Lyra didn't imagine it. She returned a decade later with her daughter and found signs she was being watched again. If you believe nature still holds miracles, don't look away, because after this story, you'll never see Bigfoot the same way again. It started with the storm, not the kind that comes all at once, but the kind that crawls over the ridgeline like a beast waking slow, stretching its claws. The clouds were a bruised blue, pulsing in the mirror of her windshield. Thunder rolled low like it was still thinking about striking. Lyra Boone, 30 years old, 8 months pregnant, and stubborn as hell, tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The tires of her medical utility truck hummed against the gravel as she wound down an old service road, just past the tree line of the Fremont-Wynema National Forest. She'd left the tribal clinic just after lunch, an elder with a stubborn cough, a young girl needing prenatal vitamins, routine visits in a place where nothing ever felt routine. The trail she was on wasn't marked anymore, not officially, but she remembered it. Her father used to bring her this way when she was little, calling it the backbone of the land. And now, it was the only way home before the storm broke loose. The radio crackled, then died. Just static. No cell signal either. A tight feeling bloomed in her chest, not fear exactly, just a heavy awareness that she was alone. Then came the impact, a sound like the world splitting open. The mountain gave a groan deep beneath her. And before she could process it, before she could say a word, something huge and fast slammed into the front end of the truck. It wasn't an animal. It was the earth itself. A boulder, slick with moss and time, sheared off the cliffside and hit her with the force of a hammer from God. Metal screamed, glass burst, the wheel jerked from her hands. The truck skidded sideways, tires digging into loose dirt, and slammed nose first into the slope. Airbags detonated. A sharp chemical taste filled her mouth. Then the world went dark for a beat. When she came to, blood trickled down from her hairline. Her ears rang. Her arms shook. She blinked through the haze and tried to move, but her right ankle screamed in protest. The windshield was shattered. The driver's door jammed. She turned, gritting her teeth, and crawled out the broken passenger side. Cool air slapped her face. Pine needles clung to her palms. Her breath steamed. The scent of rain was coming fast, carried on the wind like a warning. She checked her belly. The baby was still. She placed a trembling hand over it and waited. A nudge, then another. Relief hit like a flood, and so did the pain right after. Her ankle was bad, maybe broken. She couldn't stay. The storm was nearly on top of her. No radio, no flares, no way anyone was finding her in time. She remembered the path her father once showed her, an old deer trail that curved west toward the river basin. Maybe 3, 4 miles. She could make it if she moved fast, or crawl if she had to. She made a splint from a broken branch and the strap of her field bag, bit down on a rag, and screamed without sound as she pulled herself upright. Lightning cracked in the near distance. She limped into the trees. Time slipped sideways after that. The forest grew dark faster than she remembered. Clouds roiled overhead. Rain came in fits and starts. Each step hurt. Each breath cost her something. She talked to the baby just to keep herself conscious, her voice hoarse and thin. "You're okay," she whispered. "I got you. We just have to get to the stream, remember? You'll like the stream." But she didn't make it. Her foot caught something, a slick stone or root. Her balance faltered, and she crumpled onto her side near a dry creek bed, half hidden by ferns. Pain flared sharp across her lower back. Her fingers clawed the earth. She couldn't move. She curled onto her side, breath choppy, her hands wrapped instinctively around her belly. The contractions weren't hard yet, but they were there. She could feel them coming, slow and steady like a drumbeat beneath the ribs. Rain pattered the leaves above her. It sounded distant. She was cold. Mud crept into the fabric of her jacket. Her teeth chattered. And that's when she knew she might die out here. She tilted her head back and stared into the canopy above, letting the rain strike her face. Her vision blurred, not from the water, but from something softer, something older. That quiet grief no one ever teaches you to name. The fear of dying unseen. Then came the silence. Not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that presses, the kind that feels watched. She felt it before she saw it. A change in the air, a pressure along her skin. Lightning flashed, brief, white, blinding. And for a second, there were eyes. Not one pair, not 2, dozens, reflective, silent, higher than they should have been. In the trees, along the ridge, just watching. She blinked. Thunder cracked. The night swallowed them whole again. But she knew what she saw. She wasn't alone anymore, and somehow that scared her more than being lost ever did. Rain turned to downpour. She curled tighter, cradling her belly like a shield. Her fingers dug into the dirt. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, not from pain, not from fear, but from a lonely, aching truth. No one knew she was here. No one was coming. And then, the last thing she remembered before the blackness took her again was a shape, towering, blurred, quiet as snowfall, moving toward her on 2 legs, not running, not hunting, just arriving, as if it already knew where she was, as if it had been waiting. She woke to stillness, not silence, but stillness, the kind that makes the air feel thick and watchful. There was no rain anymore. No wind, no sirens, just the soft rustle of leaves shifting under their own weight. The first thing she noticed was that she wasn't cold, not freezing like she should have been. Her jacket had been loosened. Something dry and soft lay beneath her. Leaves, she realized, not scattered, but carefully piled into a kind of nest. They smelled faintly of cedar and crushed fern. Her head throbbed behind her right eye. Her ankle was wrapped in something coarse and warm. She blinked, turning slowly. The forest hadn't moved, but something had changed. She wasn't on the creek bed anymore. She'd been moved, and then she saw them. At first, just shapes. Massive, motionless, camouflaged in the tree line like parts of the forest itself. Then came movement, barely a twitch of shadow against bark. No sound, no breath. One of them, the largest, shifted its weight just slightly, and a branch creaked above its shoulder. There were 8. Her mind reeled as it tried to assign meaning, to put labels on the shapes her body already recognized as alive. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She couldn't. But even if she could, Something about them held her still. Not fear, exactly. Not yet. Something older than fear. Reverence. The one closest to her, taller than any man she'd ever seen, stood with its arms loose, eyes nearly level with the top boughs of a young pine. Its fur was dark, matted at the shoulders with what looked like dried mud or ash. Its face was shadowed, but not hidden. It didn't blink. To its right, a smaller one moved, but not toward her. It bent low near a log, sniffed, and retrieved a cluster of berries from a fern, placing them beside her gently, like an offering. She stared at them. Huckleberries, some crushed, some whole. They'd been for her. A breath caught in her throat. Her hand moved to her belly. The baby shifted, not startled, just turning. Calm, as if it too sensed something she couldn't name. The group remained still, but now she could see more detail. One was older, gray at the muzzle, hunched at the shoulders, with a scar across its brow. It sat a little apart, eyes glassy but alert. Another, taller than the rest, moved more like a sentry, pacing back and forth on a low ridge, eyes never leaving her. Two of them looked like females, smaller in frame, but not by much. One of those had something clinging to her hip, a child. It peeked out at Lyra with enormous dark eyes, then retreated behind the shaggy wall of fur. But curiosity pulled it forward again, inch by inch. It moved like a toddler, unsteady but eager. And then, without sound, without warning, the little one slipped past its mother and toddled straight to her. She froze. It didn't growl, didn't make a sound, just stopped beside her and looked at her face. Then, with both hands, it held out something small, wooden, smoothed by time and touch. She stared at it. A carved shape. She reached out, almost without meaning to, and took it. It was a curved sliver of cedar, no longer than her thumb. The surface bore the faint shape of a crescent, like a fingernail. She looked up. The mother, broad-shouldered and wild-haired, stepped forward fast, but not in anger. She scooped up her child in one arm, then paused. She didn't take the object back. Instead, she watched Lyra, watched her fingers curl around it. And then she did something no part of Lyra's brain could fully explain. She knelt. This towering being, this half-myth, dropped gently to her knees and placed one open palm on the forest floor. The other hand, slow and deliberate, reached forward and rested against Lyra's stomach. Not hard, not aggressive, just contact. Her hand was warm, the weight of it steady. There was no way she could have known what she was feeling for, and yet Lyra swore. She felt recognition in that touch, like one mother recognizing another. Tears gathered, hot and sudden, at the corner of Lyra's eyes. She hadn't cried from fear, not when the truck crashed, not even when the contractions started in the storm. But this broke something open. The child pressed its head against the mother's chest. The mother, Sala. That's the name that came to her. Not spoken, not given, just known. Sala withdrew her hand, stood, and backed away. From above, the older one raised a hand. Not a command, but a gesture of release. Two of the others melted into the trees. One took up post in a high branch. Another circled wide. A system, a formation. Not random creatures, but a tribe. She lay there, breath coming in shallow pulls, and watched as the beings moved in a rhythm that had nothing to do with human time. Some settled nearby, some moved farther off. One, likely the sentry, remained where it had always been, scanning. There were no words, no sounds save for the wind and the creaking trees, but everything they did spoke. They weren't just protecting themselves. They were protecting her. As dusk fell and the air thickened with dew, Lyra felt her body beginning to tremble again. She wasn't in danger now, not from them. But her ankle was swelling. Her back ached. Her skin burned. And yet she wasn't afraid. She let her eyes close. Later, she woke to the smell of something, pine resin or fire. No, just the natural musk of the forest. And under it, a scent she couldn't place. Not animal. Not exactly. Movement. She turned her head. One of them, young but not the child, was building something with sticks. Not a fire, a frame, just far enough away to not intrude. A low, rhythmic hum echoed from the old one on the ridge, like a heartbeat stretched out across the woods. She clutched the small carved token tighter. It was still there, as real as her own breath. The child was asleep now, nestled in a nest of moss against Sala's side. And in that moment, with moonlight breaking through the cloud ceiling and laying silver stripes across her skin, Lyra realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think since the crash. She might survive this. She might actually survive, but not because of search teams, not because of luck, because she was no longer alone, not just watched, not just spared, but chosen. And whatever they were, whoever they were, this tribe had seen something in her. Or maybe, in the life she carried. She didn't know why. She only knew this. The forest was no longer a place she feared. It had become her shelter. And far beyond that ridge, in places no map had named, the storm was still moving. But here there was stillness. And in stillness, something ancient had opened its eyes and said, "Not yet. Not this one. Not her. Not tonight." She didn't know how many hours had passed. Time had melted into a soft blur since the crash. Daylight was a whisper now, not a force. The canopy filtered it into patches, thin, shifting gold that didn't warm her but reminded her she was still alive. The pain in her ankle had become a steady hum. She didn't move much. She didn't have to. Every need she had was somehow answered before she voiced it, sometimes before she even thought it. They didn't speak, not in words, but the forest had begun to move differently, and she was starting to understand why. It was in the way they paused before approaching, the brief glance exchanged between two shadows high above, the almost imperceptible tap of knuckles against bark. Nothing loud, nothing rushed, just signals, unspoken agreements, a kind of choreography. She watched them closely. There were patterns to how they moved. When the sun dipped lower, one of the younger ones circled wide, scanning the edges of the glade. Not random, deliberate. At night, they took turns sitting close, never directly beside her, but always within reach if she needed them. One of the larger ones, the quiet one with the burnished chestnut fur, always stayed just outside the fire line of her vision. Sentinel. He never blinked. Not once. They were communicating, constantly. Just not like people did. Sometimes a hum would ripple through the group. Not a sound, exactly. More like a vibration in the earth, in her bones. She didn't know how, but it meant something. She could feel it, like being in the room with a cello string drawn long and low. Not music. Message. They used their eyes too. Sala, she had no other name for her, was the most expressive. She never broke her gaze too long, never looked directly unless it meant something. When Lyra winced from a cramp, Sala was already moving. A single glance between them, and she'd understood. They had no language, and yet they spoke more clearly than most humans ever did. That night, a chill set in again. Not biting, just enough to make the air sharp around the edges. Lyra pulled her jacket tighter. Her body was stiff, her belly hard and uneven beneath her hand. The baby wasn't in distress, but it was active, rolling, testing space. She heard a soft cough, not from her. She turned. Kyr, the child, was curled against Sala's chest. His breath came fast, too fast. His little shoulders shook slightly with each inhale. His skin, where it showed through patches of thinner fur, glistened. She knew that sound. A mother knows that sound. Lyra pushed herself up slowly, one hand on the moss beside her, one hand on her belly. Her body protested, but her instincts overrode everything else. She crawled across the clearing. Sala didn't stop her. That mattered. She reached them both and knelt slowly. Her knee sank into the wet ground, and she exhaled, reaching out a hand. Not to the child, never first. She reached to the mother. Sala held her gaze, then gave a single slow nod. Lyra moved. She touched Kyr's brow. Warm. Too warm. His cheeks flushed, eyes fluttering. She turned, looked for something, anything, and found a patch of rain-soaked moss, cool to the touch. She wrapped it gently in the cloth of her sleeve and pressed it to the child's forehead. Kyr didn't flinch, just sighed, like he already trusted her. Sala lowered her massive hand onto Lyra's wrist. No squeeze, no pressure, just connection. Lyra looked up and met her eyes. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something much older, much deeper. Recognition, mother to mother. When the night thickened and the child's breath slowed into a soft rhythm, Sala leaned forward. Her fingers, rough but careful, brushed a strand of hair from Lyra's face. Not with ownership, not with pity, with understanding. Lyra didn't cry this time. Not until later, after Kyr fell asleep, after the fireflies blinked low around the edges of the glade, after Sala and the other watchers returned to their places like shadows reassembling. That's when she saw it. She'd rolled onto her side, reaching for the small wood carving still in her pocket. It comforted her now. A totem. Something left in her hand like a whispered promise. Her fingers brushed it, and something else. Stone. Cool, flat-edged. She pushed aside the ferns near her elbow. There, just beneath the thinnest veil of moss and dirt, lay a slab of carved rock. Old, weathered, but unmistakable. She brushed more away. Her breath caught. Symbols, not random, not just scratches. She didn't read them the way you read English. She read them with memory. One stood out. An arch with arms reaching down, beneath it a circle. She knew that shape. Her father had shown her those markings when she was a child, carved high into the canyon wall above Williamson River. Klamath symbols, ancient ones. Shelter from the dark. She sat back, pulse thumping. This wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a sanctuary, a place carved into memory long before asphalt and boundary lines. Her father used to say some parts of the forest remembered things people forgot. The tribe hadn't just found her. They had brought her here, to a place sacred before names. She stared at the old symbols until they blurred. And then, just beside her, Sala settled again. Kyr curled between them, one tiny hand resting on Lyra's knee. She didn't move it. The fireflies pulsed softly, casting gold across the markings. She closed her eyes. The cold didn't bite anymore. She wasn't home, but she wasn't lost. And somewhere in that half-waking drift between exhaustion and awe, she let herself feel something she hadn't since the crash. Safe, even if she never understood how. Even if this tribe vanished come morning. Even if she didn't survive the labor ahead. Right now, here, among giants who spoke in silence and watched without judgment, she was no longer a woman stranded. She was one of them. And the baby inside her? It kicked once, hard, like it had just understood that too. The night deepened. No one spoke, but the forest breathed, and so did she. It began with a buzz, so faint Lyra thought it was just her ears ringing again. But then the hum deepened. Electronic, mechanical, not natural. She sat up slowly, brushing away the leaves that had stuck to her jacket, and turned toward the sound. It wasn't coming from the trees or the river. It was above, distant at first, but growing. She narrowed her eyes to the canopy, and just as she did, a flicker of silver cut across the opening in the trees. Then another. Sharp flashes, darting like dragonflies. Not birds, drones. She wasn't the only one in the forest anymore. She saw movement to her left, quick, precise. The Bigfoot she'd come to know as the lookout had already disappeared into the tree line. Another, young, wiry, vaulted from a branch to the ridge above. No sound, no panic. Just a shift in energy, a tightening of posture across the whole clearing. Kor, the elder, emerged from the shadows then, not with urgency, but with weight. Like stone deciding to move after centuries still. Lyra's breath caught. She didn't know what was coming, but they did. And they were preparing. She pulled her knees in slowly, protective, instinctive, and searched the sky again. One of the drones dipped lower. It hovered. Too smooth, too confident. Someone was controlling it. Close. Kor turned his head toward Sala, and for the first time, Lyra saw command. No sound passed between them, but Sala nodded once and scooped Kyr up into her arms. Another female joined her, and both began backing deeper into the trees. One of the others, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, approached Lyra and gently motioned with an open palm. Not a shove, not even a pull, just guidance. They were hiding her, not from the forest, from people. She let them help her up. Her ankle throbbed with each shift, but the urgency dulled the pain. Kor remained behind, his silhouette backlit now by slats of sunlight breaking through the trees. His hands weren't clenched. He made no threat, but he stood like a wall. She wanted to speak, wanted to say wait, explain, ask what was happening, but no one else spoke, and her voice felt like it would only make things worse. Somewhere not far off, human voices carried faintly, young, confident, laughing. That chilled her more than any scream would have. The Bigfoot tribe moved fast, splitting off into two. One group circled away, their massive frames barely brushing the leaves as they moved. The others flanked Lyra, shepherding her, Sala, and Kyr toward a shaded hollow deeper into the ridge. The sound of boots on underbrush followed next. Clumsy, loud, no grace. They were getting closer. Lyra crouched low as the Bigfoot led her behind a natural wall of stone. An old lava outcrop covered in moss, hollowed just enough to conceal them. Sala pressed Kyr close to her chest, the boy's breath warm against her collarbone. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He just listened. The drone passed overhead again. A second later, she heard one of the humans call out. Got a heat signature. Could be a bear or something big. 50 yards south. Lyra's breath caught. Another voice replied, cocky, or something undocumented. They weren't search and rescue. They were trackers. Researchers, maybe. Young, maybe even idealistic, but naive, and dangerously curious. One of them laughed and said, "Whatever it is, it's moving fast." She looked toward the forest again, searching for signs of the ones who had broken off. Her heart pounded. Every second felt pulled tight. A shout rang out, sudden and sharp. Then a curse. Branches cracked. A thud. Someone had slipped. Lyra tensed, but no one around her moved. Then she saw him. Not a Bigfoot. A boy, early 20s. Cargo vest. Mud-slicked boots. He'd skidded down the slope and landed awkwardly near the ledge of a drop-off, now holding his arm at a strange angle. He was separated from the others, dazed. He looked up and saw something. His mouth fell open, but before sound could escape, a shape moved beside him. From the shadows, the older Bigfoot, one she hadn't seen since yesterday, stepped into view. The boy froze. His face blanched. He tried to scramble back, but the slope gave way beneath him. He slipped. His legs dangled over the edge now. He shouted, not in warning, but in raw panic. And then, the Bigfoot caught him. No roar, no aggression. Just one hand, calloused and thick-fingered, gripping the boy's arm, lifting him back from the edge like a father grabbing a child from traffic. The boy gasped, eyes wide, breath shallow. He looked into the creature's face. And then, the Bigfoot let him go. Just turned away. Disappeared into the trees without waiting for thanks. The boy sat there, stunned, cradling his arm like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. Somewhere beyond, his friends shouted again, but he didn't answer. Lyra watched it all from the hollow, her fingers gripping the edge of a tree root, her breath shaky. Sala was beside her now. Kyr had fallen asleep against her chest. The mother didn't speak, she never did. But she placed one hand on Lyra's shoulder and looked her straight in the eye. And in that look, Lyra finally understood. This tribe had lived under the noise of the modern world long enough to know one thing. People came not to see, but to claim. Not to listen, but to document. Not to protect, but to expose. Lyra had almost forgotten. She was one of them, not the tribe. The others. She turned back to where Kor stood now at the crest of the ridge. From this angle, he looked ancient, weathered, still. His gaze was fixed not on the boy, but on the path beyond him. He was waiting, not for a fight, for a choice. And that's when Lyra felt it deep in her gut. Not just her baby, not just a kick, but a knowing. If she stepped out now, called for help, waved her arms, there'd be helicopters here by morning. With lights, with nets, with tranquilizers and cameras and all the things that rip the sacred out of the woods and drag it into daylight. She almost moved. Almost. But then Kor turned, just slightly, and sat down beside her. Not a command, not protection, just presence. A wall against the rest of the world. He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, she wasn't being held captive. She was being guarded. And somewhere far below in the trees, the boy finally stood. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He walked back toward the voices calling his name, silent and shaken, with his mouth shut tight around something he would never be able to explain. And the forest went still again, as if it had exhaled, but not finished. Not yet. It started just after dusk, when the last blush of daylight faded from the treetops and the hush of night wrapped the forest like a breath held too long. Lyra felt it first, not the pain, but the shift. A tightening inside her, low and insistent, like the first echoes of a bell deep underground. She had known this moment would come, had tried to push it back, but now it moved through her body with a will of its own. Her hands instinctively cradled her belly, and the child answered with a stretch, a roll, as if it too sensed what was coming. She looked to Sala, who had already risen without a word. The others were moving too. No panic, no noise, just precision. Rolls falling into place like stones in a stream. Kor stepped to the edge of the glade, back turned to them, head lifted as if listening to something far away. One of the younger males gathered dry moss and bundled leaves. Another retrieved something from a hollowed stump, a small pouch of coals wrapped in bark. Lyra watched, dizzy from the rhythm of it all, from the waves building inside her body, and the terrifying calm of the ones who now formed her world. Sala stepped closer, her arms sweeping gently toward a circle of smooth stones laid long before Lyra had ever set foot in this forest. They hadn't been arranged recently. This was not made for her. This was a place that had waited. She knelt with effort. The pressure in her hips was sharper now. Her spine lit up with each contraction, and the breath she tried to control broke loose as a cry that fluttered through the trees like a wounded bird. Still, no one flinched. Instead, Sala sat across from her in the circle, the flicker of flame between them, small but alive, cast shadows against her fur and made her eyes shimmer like amber glass. She held Kyr in her lap, rocking slowly, and the boy's head rested against her chest like he too had done this before. A branch snapped behind them, but not from danger. Two others entered. One carried smoldering sticks. The other bore flat stones blackened with soot. They placed them gently along the perimeter of the circle. Smoke rose in soft lines, clean and earthy. Curling upward like breath returned to the sky. Lyra's body was no longer hers alone. Each contraction came stronger, deeper. Her jaw locked. She dug her fingers into the moss. Sala reached out, not to restrain, not to lead, but to steady. Her palm pressed lightly against Lyra's back, her breath warm and slow, matching Lyra's ragged rhythm with something steady and ancient. When the pain spiked again, Lyra cried out. It echoed, and from the ridge, a sound answered, a howl. Not canine, not human, not rage, It was sorrow and strength bound into one long, bone-deep note that didn't ask permission. It simply was. And then, from far beyond, another returned it. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew they heard her. They knew she was in labor. They were witnessing. The circle glowed now with the heat of coals. Not fire, but warmth. Contained. Sacred. A womb of ash and stone built by hands that had never known walls. Sala placed Kyr down. The boy toddled forward. He reached into the fold of his mother's fur and retrieved something small, a stone, smoothed and pale, like river glass. He walked to Lyra, legs unsteady but determined, and placed it in her hand. It was still warm, and as she clutched it, something inside her opened, not just her body, but her heart. Her fear spilled over, but so did something else. Surrender. The next wave gripped her. Sharp, wet, final. She bore down. The forest leaned in. She felt her own scream, but she didn't hear it. Everything had gone still, like the world had bowed its head. And then silence. And then crying. Not hers. The baby. The sound tore through her like a storm, tearing down branches and lighting up the sky. Not from pain, from relief, from joy. From the primal, feral, knowing that she was still here, that the child had made it, that the forest had held its breath with her, and had exhaled now with grace. She couldn't see clearly, but someone reached for the child. Not to take, to lift, to present. The baby's cry rang out again, and that's when the trees moved, just slightly. Branches bowed inward, not violently, like the forest itself had lowered its limbs. A rustle of wind pushed through the upper canopy, even though the night was still. Lyra turned her head, barely. Her strength was nearly gone. But on the far ridge, silhouetted by moonlight, stood something massive, broad-shouldered, holding a smaller shape in its arms. Not watching, witnessing. Another parent, another child. The howl came again, not a warning, a welcome, and the night answered. Sala pressed her hand to the newborn's forehead, then, without speaking, brought Kyr forward. The child reached out and touched the baby's face, gentle as light. Their eyes met, just for a second, the old and the new, the wild and the human. And nothing had to be said, because something ancient had just been fulfilled. Lyra wept, not from pain, from awe, from the knowing that she had given birth in the center of something that most people never even believed existed. And somehow, it felt right. Not terrifying, not accidental. Right. The wind calmed. The smoke drifted upward again, and as the baby quieted in her arms, Sala leaned forward, pressed her forehead to Lyra's. Not as dominance, but as bond. And then the others stepped back, one by one, disappearing into the dark like they'd never been there. But they had. She would always know they had. And the child, born under canopy and smoke, within a ring of stone and fire, would carry that knowing inside her, even if the world never believed it, even if no one ever saw it again. The forest had seen, and somewhere in its bones, it had marked the moment. Not with words, but with silence. A silence that meant she was no longer just human, and this was no longer just birth. This was belonging. Morning came without music. No bird song, no wind, not even the distant echo of water trickling through the cracked ravine. Just the quiet, that kind of holy, eerie stillness that settles over a place after something sacred has passed through it. Lyra blinked up at a soft gray sky filtering through the mist. Her body ached in too many places to name. Her arms felt hollow and full all at once. The child, her child, slept curled against her chest, skin to skin beneath her jacket, warm and breathing slow. She could smell her. She could feel the tiny weight of her. The forest had not taken her. It had given her something instead. She turned her head slowly, expecting to see them, expected to find the silhouettes leaning in trees, or the shadow of Sala crouched nearby like always. But they weren't there. Not a sound, not a trace. She pushed herself up onto her elbow. Her heart stammered, confused, not in fear, but in a strange, disoriented grief. The ring of stones was still there, though the embers had cooled. The moss where Cor had stood was undisturbed. But no footprints remained, no scent, no stirring in the ferns. Nothing. Gone. They had vanished. Not fled, not scattered. Departed. She looked down at her daughter. The infant yawned, lips pulling back in a silent stretch before curling into sleep again. Tears burned behind Lyra's eyes before she knew they were coming. A sound came from behind her, a branch cracking softly. She turned, shielding the child instinctively. But it wasn't a threat. Two figures emerged through the clearing, one in forest ranger green, the other wrapped in a medical blanket, radio on her shoulder, boots crunching slow and careful through underbrush. Search and rescue, her name was called once. Lyra Boone? She nodded, too stunned to speak. They approached gently, cautiously, but with something fragile in their posture, as if they sensed she was standing on a thread stretched too tight. They wrapped a blanket around her and handed her a thermos, but she barely drank. She didn't need heat. Not that kind. Her blood still carried the warmth of fire and silence. Her body still smelled like moss and smoke and milk. They asked her questions she didn't really answer. How long had she been gone? How had she survived? Who had helped her? She blinked and stared at the tree line behind them. The trees didn't answer either, but Sala had said goodbye. Not in words, in a moment, right before dawn. Lyra remembered now. Her head resting against stone, the baby cradled in her arms, her body somewhere between sleep and sacred delirium. Sala had leaned in close. Her scent was earthy, musky, but there was something motherly in it too. She didn't touch the baby. She touched Lyra's shoulder, just once, and then pressed her cheek gently to Lyra's brow. Then she was gone. Lyra looked down and saw something in the folds of her blanket now. Something she hadn't noticed in the confusion of being lifted and carried to the ranger vehicle. A bracelet, braided from thin grass and long strands of gray fur, bound together with what smelled like crushed wild thyme. Not store-made, not primitive, deliberate, ceremonial. A token left behind, not by accident. She clutched it and felt it pulse warm in her palm. They were real. They were watching. And she knew they had chosen to disappear before the humans came. Not because they were afraid, because they were protecting her still. When the medics cut open her jeans to brace her ankle, one of them gasped. Lyra followed their gaze and saw it too. A mark, faint but undeniable, curling across the baby's upper forearm. A birthmark, shaped like a crescent, like the wooden totem Cure had pressed into her palm all those days ago. She didn't explain. She didn't speak. What would she even say? Instead, she whispered to the baby curled against her, so soft no one else could hear it. You're born of two tribes now, one that speaks, one that listens. And the baby breathed, and the wind, just once, swept gently through the pines. Not wild, not loud, just enough to move the ferns. Just enough to feel like someone was still there, watching, waiting, guarding the border between the world Lyra came from and the one she had only barely returned from. She looked back as the vehicle pulled away. One last glance at the forest. There were no eyes staring through the trees, but she knew they had not left. They had only stepped beyond where people look. There were things Lyra never said aloud, even after all these years. The forest didn't leave her, but the world outside it demanded other truths. Cleaner ones, easier to explain. They asked about the baby. They marveled at her recovery. They called it a miracle, the kind people like to believe in because it's easier than admitting something greater is still out there, moving where no satellite can see. They filed paperwork, closed the case, and chalked her survival up to exceptional will. That was fine. She let them, but the bracelet never left her nightstand. 10 years passed like dusk through trees, slow, then sudden. Her daughter grew, Ashla. She carried the quiet of the woods in her bones, Not shy, just still. Observant in ways most adults never learn to be. She'd stare for long minutes at things other kids never noticed. Birds flicking their feathers before rain. The sway of tall grass just before wind. And sometimes, when the world went too loud, she'd stand outside barefoot and breathe. Just breathe. Like she was waiting for something to speak. And Lyra never interrupted her. Ashla's hair had darkened as she aged. Thick and untamable. Always full of static and forest twigs, no matter how often Lyra brushed it. Her eyes stayed the same, dark, reflective, impossibly calm. And the mark on her forearm, that soft crescent of skin just a shade paler than the rest, never faded. It pulsed sometimes in moonlight, though Lyra never told her that. Some things weren't for science. Some things just were. She kept the stories to herself. Not out of shame, but protection. Some truths aren't made for classrooms. But still, Lyra watched her daughter for signs, and they came more often than she'd expected. Ashla drew constantly. Not flowers, not friends, but beings. Always tall, always gentle, always watching from behind trees. She never showed them to anyone. Not even Lyra at first. They were tucked into sketchbooks beneath her bed, paper warped with smudges and erased lines. But Lyra found them one evening while tidying, and something in her chest locked tight. One sketch, crude but exact, showed a creature crouched near a fire ring, a child pressed to its chest. Another showed a bracelet made of twisted grass. Another, a stone circle under moonlight, with a shadow standing at its edge. She didn't say anything. Just closed the book and put it back where she found it. Ashla didn't need permission to remember. It was in her blood. Years passed. Seasons folded in on themselves. Lyra moved towns twice, found quieter work, took fewer patients, and learned to live with the ache of silence. But every once in a while, just often enough to unsettle, Ashla would say something that cracked open the past, like when she was 6 and asked, "Why don't people ever look where the trees are leaning?" Or at 8, after a thunderstorm, when she stood in the backyard and whispered, "They were singing again." Lyra never corrected her, never redirected. She just listened. It was the least she could do, the only thing she truly owed. Then came the day Ashla found the bracelet. Lyra had hidden it, though she'd never say that out loud. Tucked in a cedar box, beneath scarves and folded flannel, wrapped in the kind of reverence people usually reserve for wedding rings or heirlooms. Ashla had gone searching for gloves, maybe a hat. But when Lyra came in from the shed, she was already sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding it. She didn't look up right away, just stared, then said, "It smells like time and lightning." Lyra froze. Ashla finally raised her eyes and asked, "Did they give this to you?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. Ashla's fingers moved across the braid like she already knew every fiber. "They left something on it," the girl said, half to herself. "Look." She turned the bracelet inside out and traced something with her nail. A series of shallow marks, barely visible in the dim light of the room. "I know this." Lyra knelt beside her. "How could you?" Ashla smiled gently. "Because I've seen it before." She reached beneath the collar of her sweatshirt and pulled out a small wooden shard on a cord. Smooth, finger-sized, shaped like a crescent. Lyra stared. Her breath caught. "That's—" Ashla nodded. "I didn't find it. It found me." She held it up between them, and for the first time, Lyra saw it fully. Not as a child's keepsake, but as a calling card. Ashla whispered, "They're not gone. They just moved deeper." And something in her voice, something older than 10 years, older than language, told Lyra she was right. That night, Lyra sat on the porch long after Ashla went to bed, the bracelet in her lap, the wood carving nestled beside it. The forest wasn't far. It never had been. She closed her eyes and listened. And somewhere in the distance, just beneath the crickets, just beyond the hum of a power line, she swore she heard breathing. Not wind, not echo, breathing. And it wasn't just memory. It was promise. That what happened in those woods hadn't been a chapter. It had been a beginning. The road into the hills hadn't changed. Still narrow, still hemmed in by firs and crooked pines, still bled with soft gravel that made the tires hum like a low warning. Lyra kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently across the center console, where Ashla's hand curled like a question. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. It was early, barely past sunrise, and the mist hadn't yet burned off the ridgelines. That silence carried more meaning now than it ever had. It had taken 10 years for Lyra to return to that place, not because she was afraid, not because she didn't believe. She had always believed, but she knew some places don't call twice unless they have something to say. Ashla had been the one to ask, not with urgency, not with childish wonder. Just one morning over tea, she looked up and said, "It's time," and Lyra had understood. They parked at the edge of an old access trail, long closed off by the Forest Service. Rusted chain, tilted sign, warnings that faded into irrelevance. The path beyond was overgrown, swallowed by vine and shadow. But Lyra knew the turn, the half-hidden switchback, the dip near the gnarled stump, the ridge. She didn't hesitate. Ashla moved ahead, light on her feet, steps sure like she remembered the land even though she hadn't seen it since she was a newborn. She didn't ask which direction. She didn't stop to guess. She led. It was almost noon when the trees parted. The clearing hadn't changed. The stone circle was still there, weathered, moss-flecked, softened by time, but not erased. The air shifted when they stepped into it. Quieter, cooler. The kind of stillness that touches skin without wind. Ashla knelt near the ring and brushed her palm across the moss. Then she looked up. "They left something," she said. Lyra followed her gaze. Half buried in a clutch of fern near the edge of the circle, nestled into the soil like it had grown there, was a small carved shape. Wood, smooth, curved. Lyra bent to pick it up. It was the same as before. Cedar polished by time, shaped like a fingernail, the edges worn, the grain familiar as breath. But it wasn't old. It was new, fresh. Someone had left it recently. Ashla's voice was soft. "They knew we'd come back." Lyra turned slowly, her pulse a steady, ancient drumbeat now. Not adrenaline, not fear, recognition. And there, just beyond the far ridge where the slope dropped into mist, stood a figure. Large, still, its form blurred by distance, but unmistakable. One arm cradled something smaller. She couldn't see the face, but she didn't have to. It was a child, not hers, theirs. Ashla stepped forward. Only a little, enough to let herself be seen. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood. The figure didn't move, only watched. And next to her, Lyra felt it. The ache she'd been carrying all these years uncoil, not with pain, but with relief. The kind that feels like finally breathing after a decade underwater. The child in the figure's arms stirred, looked up, eyes, bright even from across the distance, locked with Ashla's. The world didn't shift. The sky didn't open. No thunder, no sign. Just stillness. And two children of different bloodlines, different tribes, watching each other in perfect, mirrored quiet. Ashla's hand moved to her heart. Lyra's knees nearly gave, but she held herself steady. The figure stepped back slowly, vanishing into the gray. Not fleeing, just returning. The trees closed behind it like a breath exhaled. Gone again, but not lost. Never lost. Ashla turned to her mother, eyes glassed with tears. Not sorrow, not confusion, just the ache of knowing something real and vast and fragile had looked back. "They're not hiding," she said. "No," Lyra answered. "They're waiting." Ashla walked to her and leaned into her side, warm and silent. Lyra looked around once more. The circle of stone, the pulse of life beneath moss, the way light filtered just right through the canopy, turning everything gold at the edges. And she whispered into the air, not toward the trees, not toward memory, just into the space where both worlds met. We didn't forget. Her hand closed around the carved wood. She would keep it with the others, not as proof, as promise. They left the ridge as the sky shifted again, light sharpening, wind returning, time clicking back into motion. But neither of them spoke until the car was in sight. And even then, they carried the silence with them. Not emptiness, not distance, but connection, a thread stretched long across time and myth, across shadow and belief, across blood and breath. And it held. Sometimes what matters most isn't what we find, but what we choose to believe when no one else does. Out there, beyond the roads and power lines, beyond what maps dare to name, there are truths too old for language and too sacred for proof. Stories that live not in books or headlines, but in the stillness of trees and the hush of moonlit trails. These truths don't shout. They don't demand attention. They wait for the quiet-hearted, for those who listen with something deeper than ears. We forget too often that not everything that's real needs to be seen. Some bonds are forged in silence. Some promises are kept without a single word. And sometimes the most profound acts of kindness come not from those like us, but from those we've spent lifetimes refusing to understand. To walk through the world with open eyes is not enough. We must walk with open hearts. We must remember that love does not always speak our language, that family is not always born from blood, and that the line between myth and memory is thinner than we're taught to believe. There are places, hidden, protected, holy, where the rules of the modern world fall away, places that cradle what we've lost, wonder, humility, reverence for life beyond our own. And in those places, miracles still happen, not the kind made for spectacle, but the quiet ones, the ones stitched together by compassion, survival, and an unspoken understanding that we are not alone. Never were. So as you turn away from this story and step back into your world, take this with you. There is still goodness in the wild, still grace among shadows, and still time to learn how to be gentle with what we don't yet understand. Thank you for joining us on this journey, one of mystery, memory, and meaning. If this story stirred something in you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps us keep stories like this alive. And if you'd like more tales that walk the edge of truth and wonder, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to our channel. Because sometimes the stories we share are the bridges we build.